All right, so I originally was going to do this all different. I was going to entitle it In-Laws and Outlaws and Ancestors. But I think I'm going to concentrate more on some of the stuff that's more current. And since we're still talking about Uncle Dick, he was the favorite of my girls, and we were all just devastated when he went before us. And I'll always remember that guy. So will my girls. And so will a lot of other nieces and nephews. The last thing I want to say about Dick, I'm glad he survived the war, but it's a wonder. The Army and the Navy and all the services have crazy tales about people who were in a place where they weren't supposed to be. And I think Uncle Dick was about the best I've ever heard of. He was declared AWOL. That means absent without leave from the World War II when he went back and reported for the next war, which was called the Korean conflict. So here he is. He has left his wife and child at home, and everybody saying, why didn't Uncle Bill go? Because he was younger and he didn't have a wife and a kid. And nobody could understand it, but Bill had been in the Navy for a couple years and done his thing. And I can talk a long time about that too. But we'll leave Bill out of it. And then, so Dick gets this first, was it a first lieutenant or do you know the officer?
No, he was a storekeeper, but I don't know what rank he was.
I mean, not Dick. I mean the guy that put him in the
Oh,
brig.
I really don't know. He was a pretty young one.
A pretty young new officer who decided that Dick was AWOL from World War II. And here was, how many years later? And you know, common sense would say, wouldn't you? You wouldn't throw a guy in the brig and charge him with being AWOL when it was this, he's come back to report for duty? What kind of a dope would go AWOL and come back and report for duty to the next war? So Dick went home and then, of course,
Well, he got put in the brig first.
Yes, oh yeah, he got put in the brig. I think Bill did too, I'm not sure.
He was one unhappy Dane, though, I know that.
What was that, Martha?
I said he was one unhappy Dane.
I think Brother Bill was probably in jail at least once, or at least on the carpet, because he borrowed an officer's Jeep over in someplace or other and wrecked it without asking the officer if he could borrow his Jeep. So, at least, did you ever hear about that, Joanne?
No, I think maybe.
But Bill was always getting into scrapes, so we won't talk about it. Anyway.
The reason why he wasn't AWOL was because they hadn't sent his service jacket out from Washington, D.C. So he was out in San Francisco with no records, and they didn't know what to do with him. So they threw him in the brig, and so the ship had to leave without Dick. And and they sent him home until they knew what to do with him. And that's when he got sent to San Diego.
Really?
Then he got to bring his wife and his kid out there,
And he played golf.
And he played golf until the end of the month.
Well, he was also the head of the brig. Or the bar, I shouldn't say the brig, the bar. That was he had 2 nights a week he had the bar duty, keeping track of everybody.
Yeah, well, it's something else. Our country was kind of crazy at that time because they didn't call the Korean War a war. They called it a conflict, a police action. And we weren't at all sure why we were there. But if you study Harry S. Truman's life at all, you will understand more about it. And they just did a thing on public television about Harry Truman. And he probably was one of the great presidents. History will remember him for some things that were not good, namely dropping the atomic bomb. But he did it feeling that he would save lives. And they sure killed a lot of people in order to end the war. And they're going to debate that for ages. But anyway, another thing I want to talk about, beside the outlaw things that people we know did, I also want to talk about a Civil War that's war between the states. And it's called the Civil War, when Abraham Lincoln was president, for you little guys. My mother had an uncle, and his name was John. And he was a bugle boy in the Union Army. And the Union and the South, okay? And he got a bullet shot in his leg. And he survived the war and carried that bullet around with him the rest of his life, and he ended up later having the leg turned, well, they call it gangrene, which means you've got to take it off, so it was amputated. So that's as far back as I can go with the war story.
Far enough.
Yeah. But part of the World War II, I wanted to share with you the fact that not only were the men in the military important in winning the war, so were the people that stayed at home. And in-laws and outlaws and wives and sisters and brothers and mothers and fathers that stayed at home really contributed to the war effort. My sister Dorothy worked first doing some kind of bullet stuff in Lincoln, Nebraska, and then when she came back to North Platte, she was washing down the locomotives at night. And she would come home and she'd be just dirty all over. But they needed somebody to do it, and so she was willing to do that. And I was really proud of her. And then later she met her husband out, he wasn't her husband then, in California where she had gone. And he was a member of the Seabees. Now, for all you guys that don't know what a sea-bee is, it's not a buzzer. It's not a bee that buzzes around and goes to sea. It stands for Construction Battalion. I'm doing a little teaching here. Could you guess that I was
Relaxing.
Construction Battalion, which was a group of men who had construction experience building roads and moving a lot of dirt around. And so Dorothy's husband was a member of the Seabees. And it was a big influence on his life in more ways than one. For one thing, he lost his wife and his family because they decided that he wasn't worth anything, I guess. And so he met my sister, Dorothy, and she was his second wife. And that probably was the best thing that ever happened to him. So, anyway.
That was, Dorothy was the second one?
Yeah. And then he came back to the city of Cincinnati. He was still in construction, so he was one of these guys that get behind those great big caterpillars. They dig out buildings that have fallen down
What's
or
a
that have
building?
collapsed. What?
Oh, pardon. Building.
A building. You know, like if you have a collapse like they had recently, they're the guys that go in with these shovels and stuff. And anyway, he was a really tough guy, but he surely has done well with the city of Cincinnati. So they really did him well. And after he left, after he retired, he became a policeman, for goodness sake, a detective at, he was called a police detective, at the ball games and stuff. And nobody argued with him. He was a little short guy, stocky, and most of us didn't care for our brother-in-law very much, because he's real pushy. But he was also a kid that went from one foster home to another foster home to another foster home, and eventually he found one family that really seemed to care for him. And that's the only one that my sister ever found out about, and his son ever found out about. That's one of the stories of World War II. So, the next thing. Any more outlaws I can think of? No, I think not tonight. But I will, instead of doing what I thought I would do, I want to remind all you young ones that it's important to know where you came from. And really appreciate that you wouldn't be the kind of person you are today if it weren't for this person that lived 100 years ago, or that person that's your mom, or this person that's your cousin, or even people that are just your friends. They're going to have a great influence on your life. And I want to tell you a story about a little town in the center of Nebraska where a miracle happened during World War II. And this is, I'm not doing this the way I planned, but it came up. So, The people at home were at war too, and what they were doing was doing all kinds of dumb things like saving the lard from frying the bacon and making jars of it and giving it to somebody who could make soap out of it so they could send the soap overseas for the soldiers. And then what else? We had food stamps. You couldn't go buy a pound of coffee in the store if you didn't have a food stamp. And you couldn't get cake mix. At that time they didn't have cake mixes. You couldn't even get flour from the store. Shut up, Ryan. You couldn't get flour from the store if you didn't have one of these food stamps. Or two, or three, or four, maybe even shoes.
Nylons were rationed, some
Yeah.
oils were rationed.
Yeah.
The nylons came.
Gasoline was rationed.
But I want to concentrate on the butter and the flour and the sugar,
And that's
because
the miracle, right?
that's where the miracle is. I'm going to read from the book jacket of this particular book. And I want you to really, especially you young ones, really be proud of who you are, because you have all these great ancestors that went before you, and they're just ordinary people who make meals and raise kids, blow your noses when you're young, and take care of your scrapes, give you a hug now and then, because they are important. They're important to your background, and they've made you who you are today. And I'm going to end this, after I get done with this book, I'm going to end this with a song that Ruth wrote. Not going to sing it. This is called Once Upon a Town. And it's written by a man named Bob Green, who's quite a well-known author, and I just came into a copy of it from a new neighbor who's happened to stop by North Platte. Every day of the year, every day of the war, the canteen, the North Platte Canteen, staffed and funded entirely by local volunteers, was open from 5 a.m. until the last troop train of the day pulled away after midnight. Astonishingly, this remote plains community of only 12,000 people provided welcoming words, friendships, and baskets of food and treats to more than 6 million GIs by the time the war ended. Can you believe that? And they weren't just from North Platte. They were from Sutherland, from Tryon, from Stapleton, from Gothenburg, from all over in there. And you have to read this book. It's available.
Came from out of state too.
Yeah, oh, yeah, some of them did.
Or some from Kansas went out.
And there's a couple of notes here from people who were interviewed for this book who survived the war and remembered stopping at the canteen. And then I'll stop too. Do you know, this is a guy who was talking about the canteen, and he remembered it. He's some 87 years old when he's interviewed. Do you know what all the civilians did during the war? Mr. Mitchell said, we in the armed forces get all the credit for fighting the war, but the way they rationed things so that we could have what we needed, we always had good pairs of shoes to wear all the time without ever having to worry about it. We had good shoes because the civilians were doing without. We got the best, and I think that's true. But he was remembering the North Platte Canteen when he said that. And if somehow the soldiers of World War II were to come through again to a town like North Platte, first of all, there wouldn't be any railroad there. The trains won't be coming through there. There'll be freight trains, but not troop trains. They'll be flying back and forth like Emmett did. He didn't have to take a train across the ocean. He couldn't do that, so he got flown over there. Or Dick went over in a ship. But there were millions of men who were transported across the country on the rails. It's a shame they tore down the darn depot. And if somehow the soldiers of World War II were to come through again, if somehow the troop trains on their 10-minute stops were to steam in here, would a town do now what this town did for those 6 million soldiers 60 years ago? I wonder. I want to read.
You realize on your computer that you can go to the North Platte News, and there's a Union Pacific, this Union Pacific canteen is on there. Then click your little tune.
Yeah.
And you can watch the canteen thing and the people walking through it. Show it inside the serving.
This was all before my time, because I was
Grandma and grandpa was in North Platte, and that's where it started.
I know that they do, I
I
mean,
mean, they probably don't realize.
they maybe don't know that grandpa, yeah.
I say, do they realize that grandma and grandpa were from North Platte, and that's where this group really started? I don't know if the little kids
I don't
realize.
know if you little kids know that. You little kids? You know that.
But like these little kids.
There was a place in the old depot in North Platte, Nebraska, where the troop trains would come through and they'd take on water for the big locomotives, you know, that burned all this coal and made soot all over everything. And they would, in about 10 to 15 minutes, these women and young girls even would come out and distribute baskets of sandwiches. And one guy found out later that it wasn't chicken, it was pheasant. And they would bring, one guy had tales of some woman coming on board and offering him a birthday cake. And he said, well, it's not my birthday. She said, well, it is now, and she gave him the birthday cake. So it's a wonderful book to read, and I'm so glad I saw it. This,
It's a big story.
what are you talking about?
That's the canteen.
Oh, the canteen?
What's
Yeah.
left of it?
Yeah, they're going to have a memorial there.
There is, where the canteen is, there's a memorial now. It opened up around Decoration Day. We were down there, and Carol and I saw it. It's out as you come off of Interstate, and people have bought great, it's mammoth. Very interesting. Now it's much higher than I am tall.
Well, my neighbor evidently wasn't there by the time that was open, because he went
Well, I
out and
think
inquired, and they said it wasn't done yet.
I think it is still.
Okay. Well, if you go through North Platte, there'll be some evidence of the canteen, but you got to get off the interstate.
Well, it's surprising when you find it, because it isn't too far. Filling station, I think. You go off on the filling station,
Yeah.
and then it's back. It's right on the highway, but then you don't drive right into it. Yeah.
For instance, how many of you who are from Gothenburg, I bet you know that you were a Pony Express station at one time, and I went there to that little cabin in your park to find out about that Pony Express.
Yeah.
I'd read about it.
Was it another historical marker that you stopped along the way to read?
No.
Oh, Ruth! Girls, get out the car!
This guy will never stop at a historical monument unless I make an issue of it.
And boy,
Unless they
did
built
she.
it.
Thank God.
Mom was so interested in a historical monument marker that she almost backed into a grizzly. And Ruth said, there's Mom! She's backing into that bear that's eating from that guy's window. So Dad goes, Pauline! I am trying to get this shot.
Well, I mean, this is the trouble. This is trouble with anecdotal history. I was not looking at a historical monument. I was looking where two rivers came together.
That's for historical accuracy.
Anyway,
You don't need to run over that bear though, they probably put a marker there. Once ran over a bear.
would they put my name on it?
Yeah.
They probably wouldn't. They probably, if I did it, they would charge me something.
Buy a bear.
Something, yeah.
Like, it's like if you run over a goose in Minnesota or a duck.
Pony Express still rides through there every year.
Yes. They do it again? Reenact.
Yeah, and can't you send letters through the pony when they do that?
Well, those reenactment things are really great. Take your kids to one of them. That's where we got hooked on the Civil War. We went to Appomattox, and we thought we were going to stay 1 hour. 4 hours later, we were still there.
Yeah.
Just listening to the reenactment. Well, this is the end. This is really the end, and I'm sorry I can't sing like my daughter, but I can tell you that this is one of her best songs, and she probably is going to in a convoluted way, Emmett is related to the American Gothic painting. His stepmother, whom he didn't know was a stepmother for a long time, is the sister of Grant Wood, the artist who painted the man with the pitchfork, and his wife presumed in front of the funny house in Iowa. American Gothic.
Yeah.
Grant Wood.
And you know, that's why we stand in the community like we do.
Well, I remember this guy and this gal standing there in the barnyard of Bert and Leila's house, posing for a picture on their wedding day. Too bad I couldn't find it.
I'm not sure why, but
I think, now back to Ruth, I think she has a hope to make this into some kind of a story or a bunch of songs. It's called The American Song, and the words and the music are by Ruth. And you can only find it on one recording that I know, besides her own. And that's the one with the tree. Okay. And this is the way it goes. I can't tell you where I come from. No single landscape that has shaped my face. 1,000 rivers against my eardrum. The cacophony of the American song. I can't tell you where I come from. When my grandpa saw the Great Plains, the uninterrupted thought of sky, he lay down into that wide embrace, disappeared into wild grass and wheat and open space. I can't tell you where I come from. North, south, east, and west, I followed my roots through hollers and clay, up from city lawns through the color TV to where I stand today. Fragments of the sum of what I had become. I can't tell you where I come from. Out of felt and out of ribbon, my grandma made the hats the ladies wore. She swore she never wanted children, but to be a good wife, she adopted the curly-headed one. I can't tell you where I come from. A friend of mine that was listening to Ruth sing this song, and she punched me, she said, the curly-headed one? Look at him. But, and then she repeats the thing about from city lawns through the color TV to where I stand today. Fragments of the sum is what I have become. But my mouth is shaped like soft southern words. My eyes, the blue of the icy snow that whirls in the canyon floor where sage and sweetgrass burn. I see the curl of my hair in the bramble field, the veins in my arms and the rails of steel that stretch for miles and miles across my heart, beating the questions I only dare ask the dark. Oh beautiful, oh spacious skies, and American Gothic, here am I. I can't tell you where I come from. No single landscape has shaped my face. 1,000 rivers against my eardrum, the cacophony of the American song. North, south, east, and west. I followed my roots. I can't tell you where I come from. And I think each one of us can echo this. There's so much that is part of us that we don't even know about, that we can be grateful for and be proud to be Americans.
What a wonderful world.
So thanks to all of them, but especially thanks to my father and my mother for providing me with a childhood that was the foundation for who I am today. What a heritage.